Hello, my name is James Inciardi, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about cardiovascular physiology in positive pressure ventilation. Here on my title screen, I have two people. One of them is a guy who, well, is probably a little bit out of shape, and he's just sitting down watching television and having a nice, relaxing time. And on the top, I put a picture of Rhea Koble. She just won the Spartan Ultra Beast Championship by running 70 miles in 24 hours and 10 minutes. And she ran through the winter in Sweden. It was she was so overcome with emotion that she knelt down and cried after she was finished. So when I think about cardiac function, sometimes I think of these two types of people. I'm going to refer back to these people a little bit later in my presentation. But anyway, let's get down to business. So here's a quick little review of the heart. I can't really talk about the effects of positive pressure ventilation without first getting into some cardiac physiology. Now, you all probably know about how blood travels in the heart. It starts in the vena cava, goes into the right atrium, then it goes to the right ventricle, through the pulmonary artery and into the lungs. After it's oxygenated, the blood goes into the left atrium, then to the left ventricle, and then it's pumped through the aorta and into the rest of the body. You probably knew that already, or at least you should. There's a couple of other terms I'm going to throw at you now. Cardiac preload and cardiac afterload. Cardiac preload is the same thing as what some people call it end diastolic volume. That term might not make a lot of sense to you, but well, see, in my hands here, I've got a slingshot that I made when I was a kid. See? So if I put a rock in the slingshot, pull it back halfway and shoot it, the rock goes about 20 feet. Now I take another rock and I pull it back as far as it will go and shoot it, and it's going to go a lot further. That load, or the stretch that I put on the slingshot, that's the same thing as preload in the heart. The more stretch you have, the more preload you have, and the more contractility you have. Cardiac afterload is a little bit different. It's how much pressure that the heart is pushing against. Take a look at this picture that I have at the bottom of the slide. It's a picture of atherosclerosis. You can imagine how if your arteries look like that, your afterload is going to be a lot greater. That's because the heart has to push blood through that smaller opening. We also have to look at something called mean systemic pressure. That's the average pressure throughout the entire circulatory system. It's measured during brief cardiac standstills. Here's an equation to remember also. You see it there. Cardiac output equals arterial pressure divided by total peripheral resistance. Having said that, remember that the major determinant of cardiac output is metabolic activity at the microvasculature. That is an important point to remember. Okay, now let me get to the Frank-Starling laws. The Frank-Starling law. It states that as stroke volume increases, blood flow to the atria and ventricles will also increase, and therefore cardiac output will increase. Here's a picture of the Frank-Starling curve. It's pretty simple, but wait, I'm not done just yet. Okay, so here's the Frank-Starling curve again. This shows normal contractility, and with increased contractility during exercise, or if you've been given a sympathomimetic, or if you're Rhea Koble, you're going to have greater cardiac contractility. Your heart will be on that upper slope. If you're the fat guy on the couch eating Cheetos, well, then your heart is going to be somewhere on the lower part of the curve. Same thing if your heart is sick, if you've had myocardial infarction, if you're in heart failure, and so on. Okay, so let's put this Frank Starling curve aside just for a minute, but don't forget it because I'm going to come back to it in just a few minutes. I have another graph here. This is the venous return graph. It shows that with increased right arterial pressure, cardiac output will increase. And now we put the two graphs together, and this is what we have. Now, why is it that increased right arterial pressure will bring greater cardiac output? Do you know why? It's because of preload. Remember? If I want to shoot my slingshot further, I'm going to have to pull the rock back harder. In other words, I need more preload. In the heart, it's the same thing. If I want more contractility, I'm going to need more preload. Okay, so now that we've put the two graphs together, we have the Frank Starling curve and the venous return curve together. Okay, now remember the fat guy watching television? Okay, so the fat guy at the beginning of my PowerPoint, remember him? Well, let's say he's sitting, eating a steak, watching some football, and all of a sudden he grasps his chest and says, "Oh my gosh, I knew I shouldn't have had that last TV dinner. I'm having a heart attack." Well, 5 minutes ago, he was right here on point A. Right here. And now look at the trouble his heart is in. He goes down to point B, right down here. So that's not looking so good, is it? I mean, look at that. Pressure's gone up. Cardiac output has gone down. And, that's not looking so good at all. Now, luckily, his body has some compensatory measures. Catecholamine release, which causes vasoconstriction. And this will bring him back up to point C, right up here. Well, that's better. But he better go to the hospital now, right? No time to finish the game. You gotta put down the Cheetos and call 911. Okay. So we've gone into cardiac physiology, and the question you're asking is, what does all of this have to do with effects of positive pressure ventilation on the heart? Well, hold on to your sphincters. I'm getting there. Okay, so mechanical ventilation equals increased intrathoracic pressure. We have seen that patients who are intubated and mechanically ventilated have a lower cardiac output. And there are two reasons for this. Firstly, there is increased intrathoracic pressure in patients who are mechanically ventilated. With spontaneous respiration, the negative intrathoracic pressure during inspiration helps to pump blood into the right atrium. With positive pressure, however, that mechanism is defeated. As a result, there is less right atrial filling pressure. With less right atrial filling pressure, there is less preload. So I'm pulling that slingshot back a lot less. You understand? I'm not pulling it back quite as far. The right atrium does not fill quite as much, so there is less preload, so it doesn't push blood so good. And this translates into less filling of all the ventricles of the heart, including the left ventricle, which is the chamber of the heart that's responsible for pushing blood throughout the body. This is especially significant in patients who are already hypovolemic. I think you can probably figure out why that is, right? Can you figure that out? Well, if they're already hypovolemic, then they already have a lower preload. And then if you put them on mechanical ventilation, now they have even less preload. So that's sort of, that's not so good. Two things affecting the cardiac output instead of just one. PEEP. The second cause for reduced cardiac output has to do with PEEP. Increasing lung volume will bring higher levels of pulmonary vascular resistance. There's a lot of evidence that shows that PEEP and PEEP-I will reduce cardiac output and systemic blood pressure. However, as you see on the chart on the page there, it's not quite the same for ARDS patients. The pressure doesn't really seem to transfer into the great veins as much for ARDS patients. So if you had a patient who was hypovolemic and you put them on the ventilator, which of these dots would correspond to their likely position on the curve? Is it it's not A, B, or C. It's either yellow or blue or purple or red. Can you guess? Okay, it's the red one. The red dot demonstrates decreased right atrial pressure and decreased right atrial preload and decreased cardiac output. So that's why we say moving to the left on the curve, that's not such a good thing. It means that that's not as advantageous a point for the heart to be in. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed my lecture. I hope you found it informative. And if you have any questions, I have my email address right there. Please feel free to email me at any time. Thank you very much.